Men's Health details and other periodicals, and also has a blog for Psychology Today. Dr. Avena, did I capture that okay?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about whatever, anyone's really interested in discussing. I mean, Lindsay invited me to come and speak to the group, sort of under the, rubric of the statistics, but for some reason I don't know, in my mind, I guess I thought we had talked about maybe me talking about other things. I don't really find it very easy to talk about statistics in terms of, talking to students about it, because to me statistics is such a difficult thing and such a personal thing, in the sense that there really is no sort of general consensus on how to do your statistics. Your statistics is going to be very specific to your dissertation. If you're doing a qualitative dissertation, then you're not going to have to worry about statistics, but you're going to have a whole host of other issues related to your data analysis you'll have to think about. But if you're doing a quantitative study, what type of statistics you're going to need to know really boils down to, what your research questions are and what you're going to be using in terms of the types of analysis that you'll be doing. So I can speak a little bit about, I thought maybe I'd spend just a few minutes talking about kind of general tips about statistics. I also teach the statistics course at NCU, so I can speak a little bit about that. But then I'm really happy to really just answer questions people have about just anything. I mean, sometimes I think it's good to talk to a faculty member who's kind of just, interested in lots of different things, and somebody that you can kind of just ask questions to, just sort of off the cuff, not in sort of a formal way. So that's sort of what I had envisioned for tonight. So I guess I'll start off by just saying a few words about statistics. One thing I often tell students when they take my course for statistics is that it's important to remember that statistics is actually more of an art than a science. And I say this because, when you go through the statistics courses and you start working with statistics, you can pretty soon see what I mean by that, because you can massage your statistics in a way to kind of make it work no matter what your questions are. Now, it's up to you as a researcher to decide, well, where do you draw the line between something being like, an inappropriate massage, if you will, of maybe being a little bit too liberal with the way in which you, partition your power or things like that, versus really sticking to, the hard, fast statistical approaches that are required in terms of, being able to meet power, being able to make sure that you have meaningful results. So I think that, that's something that's important to remember, from the outset, is that if you have this idea in mind of what would be the most appropriate statistics to do, then I think it's important to keep in mind that, those might change as you go through your dissertation, because sometimes people have this mindset of what type of analysis needs to be done. And then when they do their analysis, they say, oh my goodness, it didn't work. Or, maybe now I'm looking at these variables and realize I should add another one in. And so I think it's important to kind of keep an open mind about it and not be, upset if things have to change in terms of your statistical plan, because it's something that does often happen. Same with post hoc tests. A lot of times, we realize sort of after the fact, when we're doing a quantitative analysis, that, maybe a different post hoc test would be more appropriate than the one we had potentially suggested in our dissertation proposal. And I think it's fine to change that. But again, I think it's something that, you sort of have to work with your chair and your SMA to kind of just, make sure that everyone's in agreement with whatever types of changes you're planning to make. So my advice to students that are in the dissertation phase is, be open-minded when it comes to statistics. Don't be afraid of statistics. One of the biggest things I see in students who are taking the 7104 course for statistics is that, people start off that course and they're like petrified of statistics. They think, oh my gosh, I haven't done a, statistics class in years, or I've never done one, or it's just, so foreign to me. And by the end of my course, I feel like many of them, most of them, I hope, really feel like, oh wow, this wasn't that bad. It's really something that, people are very afraid of, but I think it's the fear of the unknown and the unfamiliar. And so once you really delve into the concepts and begin to start to understand what you're looking at, understand that a lot of statistics is more about the theory and not so much about the numbers. I mean, of course, we need to know how to do the calculations and figure these things out, but that part of it, the math part of it, I think is easy if you understand the theoretical part of it. So if you understand the conceptual parts of it, then I think doing the math and computing the numbers is easy. So I think that the most important thing in terms of coursework with statistics is to make sure that you do understand the actual information that's being covered, and the concepts, and understand why we're using these numbers or where these numbers are coming from. Because if you approach it as a math class, I don't think that it's going to be quite so easy, as opposed to approaching it from the standpoint of this is, more of a conceptual class where I'm learning about, the meaning of these numbers and what they can actually do for information. So that's really my spiel on statistics. I mean, there's, like I said, it's such an individualized thing. It's really kind of hard for me to, give a formal presentation about statistics, because it's so different for everybody and everyone's going to use them in unique ways. One thing I will also say, just before I kind of open it up to discussing other things and questions that you guys might have, is that it's definitely to your advantage to take advantage of the resources that NCU offers for statistics. And so I could speak as a chair. I've had several of my students use the Academic Success Center for help with statistics. And so, when it comes down to the nitty gritty of, hey, I got my dissertation proposal approved, I got my IRB proposal approved, I got my data collected. Oh no, now I got to analyze this stuff. Like, how do I do this? Or what am I doing? It can be a little overwhelming for some. And so there are resources at NCU beyond just what, mentorship your chair and your SME can provide you with, that can really kind of help you sort of dig into the weeds of, the data and the numbers. And so just be aware that the Academic Success Center is there, and they'll provide you with coaching, and it's free for students. And I think it's something that students should take advantage of. You just have to have your chair fill out a form, which most chairs are happy and willing to do. And you can get set up with a coach there that can really kind of help you through some of the questions that you might have if, you think extra help would be beneficial. So I think that's something that, students should be aware of and make sure they're taking advantage of, because it's a great resource. And, it's something that I think could really help people, especially when it comes down to the fact of, looking at your data and your numbers and what you're going to do with them. So,
hey Nicole, it's Richard from Medios here.
Oh, hey Richard, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing? Nicole, maybe something it might be useful to explain.
Yeah.
Is that when we get to chapter 5, students nearly always say this study would have been better with more people, and I always say to them that's not true, and then I have to explain what the concept of power really means, and why they don't need more people. Do you want to possibly just speak to the concept of power, because you make such a big deal of it, don't we? We say in chapter 3, if you've got a quantitative study, go to G power and work out the power. So
yeah, I agree. Maybe you can give your input on this, since I think it'd be beneficial for people to hear more than one faculty's opinions on this. But I think Dr. Remedios is right. He's another faculty member at NCU in psychology, for those of you who aren't familiar. And, it's true that we do make a big deal about, making sure you have enough participants to make power, to meet power. And, I agree that often it becomes the case if you didn't get statistical significance, people sort of go to the default of saying, oh, well, if I had more subjects, I might have gotten statistical significance. And that's actually not the case. And it's not always, it doesn't always have to do with the number of subjects that you have. Richard, do you want to give your kind of take on why that is?
Yeah, so the concept of power is that it's the minimum number you need within a particular study to make sure that if you got a null result, you could be confident that is a null result. So the power of a study depends on the type of analysis that you do. And so if you are comparing two completely separate groups, which is called between subjects design, I'm sure some of you know this, the number of participants you need per group it's about 64, and I'm just doing this off the top of my head now, 64, 65. But if you're measuring something for the same person twice, then that's a within subjects group, and then the requirement for the sample size goes down. And it's like Nicole says, that the idea of power is that if you don't find a significant result, how confident can you be that is a true significant result? That's what power is there for you. So if you had your required sample size and you got a null result, it really doesn't matter if you get another 1,000 people, because the issue of generalizability is based on this power. It's saying, look, for this level of power, 0.8, if you get a null result, you can be 95% certain that is a true null result. It's always better to get more people, but getting more people kind of suggests that the type of people that you're going to get are going to behave in a systematically different way to the people that you've already got. But you've already got a sample, you've already got a type of sample already. So the idea that when you get more people, that is going to change, that really depends on those people being systematically different to those people you already have in your sample. Now, if you've got a random sample, the idea of a random sample is that many things cause an outcome. If you have a random sample, you say all these many things, all these unexplained things are probably equally distributed in the sample that I've got. So as long as I meet my power calculation, it doesn't really matter if I get another 1 million people, because I've already controlled for all these unexplained things, because I'll just assume they're randomly distributed amongst my sample. So the interesting thing, though, is that if your study is underpowered, so you don't get the sample size you need, but you get a significant result, you can be more confident that's a true significant result, which is a bit bizarre. And the reason is that, don't do this, but if you look in the equations for the different analyses, whether they're ANOVAs, regressions, built into them is always a sample size. And so when the sample becomes smaller, it's really hard to get anything significant. And so if you are underpowered and you get a significant result, you can be more confident that's a true significant result. You would always say you would need a bigger sample, but I have seen so many studies that are massively underpowered. My wife's a behavioral ethologist. She works with baby monkeys, and the studies that she does, she has like 24 subjects, and that's taken her 3 years to get those subjects because they're baby monkeys. And I say, how do you get this published? You're underpowered. She said, I'm getting significant results. And so that's really the explanation for power. So I think if you look in almost every dissertation, quantitative dissertation in NCU, in the suggestions for further research, people nearly always say you need bigger sample. And the point is you don't. If you got the right power, you just don't.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point to bring up, Richard, because I think, again, that's kind of just the default thinking of, if I didn't get what I expected, I need more. But as you've just so clearly explained, that's not always the case, especially when it comes to statistics. And that's why we have these power calculations. That's why we, have students do the power analysis before they even begin collecting data, so that they have a sense of, all right, well, how many people do I have to get to participate to know whether or not my results are real or meaningful? And, if it's 100, okay. But if you get, 1,000 people, that's not going to really change much in terms of like the theory. It's just a matter of sort of meeting that minimum number of subjects needed to meet that power analysis that should give you the appropriate answer to your questions.
And that kind of almost feeds into a lot of problem statements that students have. I don't know what stages everybody is who's here, but a lot of times, and I'm sure I know you get this as well as I do, Nicole, is that a student will say, I want to do this study, and the gap in the research is that the study has never been done in Chicago.
Right.
And the argument you're trying to put over to the student is that just because a finding has been found in New York, it doesn't need to be done in Chicago. Otherwise, you could say you need to do that same study in every city in the world. The point is that the study that was done in New York was with a representative sample. And that representative sample includes the representations of students in Oregon, and students in San Diego, students in Arizona,
right,
in Chicago. And that always seems to me to be a difficult one, because they say the results would be different. And you got to say, why would they be systematically different? Why are the students systematically different? Because that's the claim that you're making.
Right. And I think the idea there is that, people need to understand that, the authors, when they conduct studies, let's just say, if like you said, if the sample was in New York, the people who conducted that study hopefully did it in such a way that their sample was representative of the entire population of the United States. Right. So again, you could pick New York, Boston, Chicago, Miami, whatever city you want. The idea would be that, the people included in that sample would be similar to the types of people that you would have included in the sample had you picked another city to do it in. So yeah, the idea, behind disclosing the geographic location of certain studies is not so much to focus on, what's happening in New York or what's happening in some other part of the country. It's really just to, state this is where the study actually happened. And I think this sort of behind the scenes of all that is the fact that, if the researchers who published that study did a good job, and if it's published, then presumably they did, because the editors and the people reviewing it wouldn't let it get published if they didn't, that, they were sure enough to make sure that it was representative of the entire population, not just representative of the people living in, Manhattan, for instance. So yeah, that's another good point that I think, students benefit from learning about, is the fact that, the actual geographic location of a study sometimes has very little to do with the meaning of the study or the results of the study. Because the idea is, if we're doing our studies appropriately and designing them appropriately, the physical location of where the study occurred really shouldn't have much weight in terms of, what we're talking about. So does anyone have any questions for me or for Richard or for, any other faculty on the call about statistics or, anything else that anyone wants to talk about? I mean, I'm really happy to kind of just talk about whatever things are on your minds or questions that you guys might have about research, mentorship. What do you do after your PhD? What do you do with your data once you're done with, your dissertation? I'm happy to really talk about whatever you guys are interested in.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
I would like to work on my dissertation even when I'm finished and turn it into a mixed methods.
Okay.
Because in South Florida, where I am, we have the highest rates of HIV infections in the United States. We are number one.
Okay.
And right now I'm going to complete a qualitative study, but I would like to put some kind of survey on so I can get hundreds of responses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my question is, do I have to use a survey that's already been used? Can I make my own? Do I have to do a pilot study?
Yeah, so in terms of doing a quantitative survey, the best bet is to find something that's already out there and validated in the literature. So something that's already been published and used by other researchers. The reason for that is survey development is is its own like bear. You don't want to get involved with something like that unless you really want to get involved with something like that, because there's a lot that goes into developing a survey and making sure it's valid and reliable. So if you want to create something from scratch, you're going to have to do a heck of a lot of work to just get it. You're going to have to get it published as a validated survey before you could actually use it in the population that you want to study. And so it's highly suggested that you try to find something that's already established and out there in the literature. That'll save you a lot of time, save you a lot of, stress and anxiety about, trying to make sure that it's a legitimate survey to be using. And then it just gives your results more weight because, again, then you can refer to other studies that have been published that have used that survey.
My next question.
Yeah.
How would that work with an IRB, since I'm then graduated from the school, so I'm not really a student anymore?
Right. That's a really good question. So I think that would, I guess, depend on everybody's sort of individual situation, right? So if you are planning to continue your education, if you're going to be affiliated with another school after, you're done with NCU, then you would probably have to go through their IRB. I don't actually know the detail. It's a really good question. It's actually something I'm going to bring up next time we have a faculty meeting, because I don't know the sort of policy or the details about, sort of continuing research post-graduation at NCU, if there's a mechanism where students are able to do that.
Nicole,
I know certainly working with if your chair is very interested in your study and very involved, then that's always an option to, perhaps continue it through the NCU IRB, but your chair would have to be the person primarily responsible for it. But you do need to be through an IRB because, you can't be conducting research kind of just on your own. It has to go through an IRB, especially if your endpoint is to have it published in a scholarly journal. Then they're going to want to know that it's been vetted through an IRB and all the, measures are in place in terms of making sure, the subjects have been protected. So that's really something, again, I think it's a good discussion to have with your chair, and it's good to kind of think about that ahead of time. Because if it is something that you plan to do, sort of additional research or next steps, that could be something that you might want to kind of arrange ahead of time before you finish at NCU to see what opportunities there might be to continue, as a collaborator at NCU. But I don't quite know what the policy is or if there is one. So it's definitely something to look into, and I'll look into it too.
Thank you. The reason I'm asking Dr. Avena is because my chair wants to have my literature review published separately from my dissertation as a whole.
Okay.
Because it's such a hot topic, and the Centers for Disease Control are very interested in it.
Yeah.
And they want to present this at Howard University in November, in Washington, D.C., because they have an anti-HIV stigma conference in Washington, D.C. every November at Howard. They wanted me to come this past November, but I had no data.
Right.
So, and I mean, you read my paper. I have almost 300 references.
Right.
So I really worked this very, very thoroughly, and I left nothing unturned.
Yeah.
And I want to submit this as dissertation of the year and as a dissertation poster, because it is such a hot topic with the CDC.
Right.
So I wanted to know what I could do once I'm finished.
James, let me try to answer some of your questions, because I've had a lot of experience with this. Because you're working with NCU, you will have had 2 IRB permissions to get through, from the sites and then from NCU IRB. when you are no longer with NCU, you can just get permissions from those sites. So, for example, I have had a lot of students who have had a site agree their IRB, but the NCU IRB have not agreed to the person collecting all of the data. They say you can't collect some of these bits of data. But so what that has meant is that that data has been collected, but not by my student, but the student, after they finish the NCU part, just go back and just complete the rest of the data collection. So the issue with you being with us is really who is sanctioning the study. And if you have an IRB sanctioned study, it doesn't need to be with us. It's over who sanctions the IRB. And let me just comment on that mixed methods thing. And I'll just say something that I'm sure all of you have read Creswell. Me and Creswell don't get on very well. We kind of have had quite a few arguments. So take this with a bit of advisement. The thing about mixed methods is that just because you've got two methods doesn't make the study any better. And the reason is this. If you are examining the same phenomenon using two different methods, that's called multi-trait, multi-method. And that is a really, really good thing to do. If your survey is doing something than what your interview was trying to do, I know John Creswell calls that, and it is interpreted in a lot of the mixed methods books as mixed methods. It's not mixed methods, because one study is looking at one thing, and another study is, and if you're answering the same research question and collecting the data using two different methods, that's mixed methods, because you're examining the same phenomenon using qualitative techniques or archival techniques, and you're using maybe a survey, and what you're doing, this is true triangulation. You're trying to bring the sources of evidence for the phenomenon by different methods. That's mixed methods. But if you just do a study and answer one research question using a qualitative technique, and answer another research question and answer that using a quantitative technique, you've used two methods, but they're two different studies. They're two different research questions. So when you say you need to do mixed methods or you want to do mixed methods, the question is when you do that paper, is that paper about two different research questions or about the same one? Because if it's about the same phenomenon using two methods, brilliant, because that's really, really rare. But if you're answering two research questions using different methods, all you're doing is using different methods to answer different research questions. If you want to call it mixed methods, you can, but for me, the research question answered by using different methods for that research question, that's mixed methods. If you're answering different research questions with different methods, that's just that would be like putting your dissertation together with somebody else's and just say, I'm using mixed methods here because I use this technique and somebody else uses that technique. The two different research questions.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, Richard. I think, some students, I believe, and I even think some PhDs maybe even, are under the impression that it sort of makes your study, it bolsters the study if you have multiple methods. Like if you have a mixed method study where you're doing a quantitative and a qualitative, so it makes it just even better than even qualitative alone or quantitative alone.
Well, it does if it's for the same phenomenon, Nicole, because it's really difficult to examine the same phenomenon.
Right. And I don't think that I see lots and lots of, dissertations at NCU because I'm the academic reader for our school. And I don't really think I've ever seen one that's done what you're saying. I think, to answer the same question using two different approaches is extremely difficult, and that's challenging, and that does add to it. But I don't know if I see that too often. I think a lot of times when people use what we talk about as a mixed method approach. It's really, like you said, answering different questions using different techniques, which, is great and adds to our information, but I don't necessarily think it makes this study any better per se. I think in terms of publishing, and again, this is something I want to bring up to the group, because I think, there's a lot of students out there that do some really great work, and they do this dissertation, they put all this work into the dissertation, and they don't publish it. And there's so many opportunities to publish it in a scholarly journal. And I really think it'd be great if students, saw the value in that and kind of saw how, I know you're exhausted by the time you get done with your dissertation manuscript. The last thing you want to think about doing is more writing and more, revisions. But it really can be a benefit to take your study that you work so hard on and turn it into something that's an academic publication, something that's published in a scholarly journal. It can be very rewarding. It can be beneficial, career-wise, to be able to say, yeah, I have my PhD. Oh, and plus I'm a published author. I've published my study in a journal that's been peer-reviewed. I think that that's a fabulous achievement, and I think it's something that, I'd like to see more students taking advantage of. The faculty at NCU have so many publications, have such a rich history in publishing, and these are things that people can and are willing to help with. So I think that, it'd be great if students, became more aware of that as something that, they should consider, not just sort of stopping at the dissertation and calling it a day, but really kind of just seeing it to that next step of actually publishing the data. There's a lot of options now, at least more so than there was when I was doing my PhD. There's a lot more journals that are publishing papers. So I'm not going to say it's easier to get a paper published, but I think there's a lot more variety in terms of the type of journals that are out there. So, there's different levels of sort of, I guess, how prestigious the journals are. And, there's some really super prestigious journals that are very difficult to get published in. And then there's some less prestigious journals that are still difficult to publish in because they don't accept anything that's thrown at them. But, again, there are ways in which you can get your research out there to the larger community. And I think it's something that, students should really consider, because it can be beneficial to you later on. It might not seem like it right now because you just want to be celebrating getting your dissertation done. But down the road, I think it can really be a benefit to people.
Well, I have decided to publish it. Dr. Serco wants me to publish it. Dr. Ackerman, my chair, wants it published.
Mm-hmm.
And two of my field testers read my proposal, one from Harvard Medical School, and she said to me, you really need to publish it because this is something I've never seen this before. So for me, it's a no-brainer. It's going to get published.
That's great. And I think, to just in terms of the timing of it, the sooner you do it, the better. I would not stop and take a break for my dissertation. I would go full steam ahead with the next step is publishing it, because being able to take advantage of the resources while you're still a student at NCU, and, the assistant you can get with developing and changing it. Because you have to remember, a publication in a scholarly journal looks very, very different than a publication in a peer-reviewed, a publication in your, dissertation. In terms of the formatting, in terms of the length, the breadth, you're going to have to condense and consolidate, maybe 200 pages into perhaps 8 or 10 pages for an academic journal. And so that can be challenging. It's hard to write a 250 word problem statement for some people. So can you imagine if I said, oh, take this 200 page dissertation and make it 10 pages? It's not so easy. So it's definitely something that you need help with. And again, I find, I've got a lot of academic publications, and they do get easier. The more you do, the easier they get. I think there's a technique. There's definitely a learning curve. When I was first starting to publish, I really needed my advisor to hold my hand and kind of give me a lot of feedback on, how we could say things and, what's going to be appropriate, how to word things in a way that their, reviewers are going to like or aren't going to raise flags with the reviewers. Which would then, hopefully speed up the publication. But I definitely think it's something that, people would benefit from doing sooner rather than later. If you say, oh, I'll publish this one day might not come. It's better to take advantage while, you're in the mindset of doing the work and sort of do it then.
Dr. Avena, I have a question for you. Since you're talking about dissertation stuff and you talked about the Academic Success Center, I actually wrote a comment post about tips and suggestions for students because I'm under disability accommodations. And I actually have an academic coach. Her name is Dr. Sarah Northern, and we're actually working on my dissertation now, and I'm only in stats too.
Okay.
So my question for you is what tips would you give somebody that is going, I'm going to do a qualitative study, but what tips or suggestions would you give somebody that doesn't know about the Academic Success Center, whether it's using the statistical approach versus the writing components or the group? Because there's a lot of people ask me, DJ, tell us about it. And I'm like, well, it's wonderful. Well, because I had a good experience doesn't mean that everybody else is. So for the fellow people that are here that are new to the school or whatever, what tips and suggestions could you give us?
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you for that. So I got to say, I mean, I've been recommending the Academic Success Center to students for years, and I've not had one student come back to me and say, oh, this was a miserable experience, or I didn't get anything from it. The good thing about it is they have group sessions where, that are ongoing that deal with writing, concept development. I mean, I can't even begin to list all the things that they do because they really just do everything that you possibly could need for your dissertation, and they're there to help you. And they're there to, I think, complement what support you get from your chair and your SME. Sometimes you just need to hear something a different way, or sometimes you just need to have that little bit of extra sort of one-on-one attention that's going to help you sort of see what needs to be done to get the task done. And I think that's really what they do. And the thing I like about the Academic Success Center is they're very, problem focused in that, you don't go to them and say, oh, hey, I need help. You go to them and say, I need help with my problem statement. And that's what they're going to help you with. Like, they're not going to, you have to know what you need help with, and your chair will help you identify that because your chair is the person that recommends, that you see them. But I think, again, it's not something I think, if there's students on the call that are maybe new and just don't feel like they're struggling or have any issues at this point, I think it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, because it's really just a resource that you can utilize at some point if you get to a point in your dissertation process where you feel like, I kind of don't, I feel like I'm getting a little stuck here and I need somebody to help me kind of sort of figure this out. That's really what they do and what they do for students. And like I said, I have so many of my students that, I've sent to them just for various reasons. And everybody that I've interacted with has had nothing but happy things to say. And it doesn't have to be one-on-one. They do group sessions too. Mm-hmm. So if you're not like keen on the whole, personal coach or anything like that, that's fine. They have group sessions that you can sit on where there's small groups of students that kind of, talk about issues that they're having with whatever problems it might be. Everyone who's at the same stage kind of gets together, and the coach will sort of lead through a discussion and, help people kind of see their way through that. So I think it's a great resource. I've always been a person who has said, hey, if it's available and it's free, I'm going to take advantage of it. And I think students should just, be aware of it. It's there for you, that, they want you to use it. So definitely take advantage of it if you find that you have a need for it.
Yeah, that's what I found out too. I mean, when I first went there, she goes, I can't help you with your coursework because you're doing good, but I know you're going to be doing a dissertation. So I'm doing intimate partner violence, same-sex couples, and how healthcare providers lack the warning skills to actually treat them in the state of Montana. Because I know a lot of people that are healthcare providers that it's a big issue. So you're right. You go there and they'll tell you, okay, this is a problem. What do you want to work on? Oh, your problem statement. So it is really good. I agree. Even the statistics part too. I use them for part of this. I'm actually in stats too right now in week 9. So my question for you based upon stats is, it's a twofold question. Is the first part is, what made you decide to pick statistics or become a statistician, whether any other field like forensic psychology or what Dr. Remedios does for a living? What made you decide to pick statistics? And 2, what advice would you give besides, oh, the statistics is another way of thinking, don't look at it this way, but what other advice would you give to students so they wouldn't be overwhelmed and want to pull their hair out like Jim and I do?
Yeah, those are great questions. So first I have to say, I don't identify myself as a statistician in the least. I honestly, I think that I'm teaching statistics at NCU, and I think it's because no one else wanted to teach it, and they just assigned it to me, to be honest. That's the God honest truth. I enjoy teaching it, don't get me wrong. I think it's a great course. It's something obviously the students need to know, and I'm happy to kind of, shepherd them through the process. But it's certainly not my bread and butter, if you will. Richard's saying in the chat that he volunteered to teach it. Well, he's a better man than I am. But yeah, I think it's certainly an important part of getting a PhD. For me, I had a good experience in graduate school taking statistics. I had a great instructor. I actually still have the textbook that I used for statistics, and I refer to it on a regular basis. And so I feel like I really felt like I had a good command of statistics when I learned it in graduate school and when I took the courses that I took. And I felt like that was good for me because then I felt confident throughout my career when I would encounter, studies and interpreting the statistical analysis. I would be able to see things that, I don't necessarily know that everyone else could see in terms of maybe flaws in the way it was analyzed and things like that. So I think having a good foundation in statistics is important because not only do you need it to get the job done in terms of just getting your PhD, but you'll also need it to be like a critical thinker, and to analyze other papers later on, but also just to analyze the media. Like we see statistics all the time. We're constantly being bombarded with statistics about various things. And if you don't have a sort of keen eye about what those numbers actually mean or what these terms actually mean, a lot of us can get fooled by it. So I think it's important just, from the standpoint of thinking about, information coming into us and how we process it, knowing good statistics. And so that kind of answers your question. I mean, I think my passion or what I do is more of, I identify more as being somebody I'm interested in teaching. I'm interested in helping people, achieve their goals with getting a PhD. But my sort of thing that I identify as would be somebody who studies nutrition and how it affects the brain. And of course I need to know a lot about statistics for that because, we're conducting studies and, thinking about these things a lot from a quantitative standpoint, more so than a qualitative standpoint.
Well, with statistics for me, the reason why I like it is I like the abstractness of crunchy numbers, but because I have Asperger's, a high functioning form of autism, I'm like a brilliant mind, like David Nash, the beautiful mind. I can take a whole list of data and find the mean, median, and mode just by looking at it. And so you're right. By having a good foundation of statistics, we use it on our everyday life, Dr. Avena. Think about it. When we go to the grocery store, when we it's everywhere around us. So you're right. You do got to have a good foundation of statistics. Yeah.
I think it just helps just to make you a better critical thinker in just lots of facets of life, to kind of know the basics about it. And in terms of your second question with sort of, I guess, additional tips on what you need to do, I think a lot of times students get hung up on their grades and just getting a good grade and, making that A or B or whatever their goal is. And yeah, grades are important, but they're really not, because nobody ever asks you what your graduate school GPA was. I've never, ever had anyone ask me that. They just want to know if you graduated or not. And so I think, in graduate school, the idea here is that grades are sort of an afterthought. You're here because you want to learn and you want to understand the concepts. And so I think it's to the benefit of students to really think about that and say, okay, yeah, my grade is, sort of important to me because it gives me an understanding of where I'm, falling in terms of how well I'm doing in the course. But what's more important is that I actually understand this stuff.
Right.
And I think with any type of math, you have to understand what you're learning before you can go on to the next step. So, you know, if you're in introductory statistics and you're having a hard time, you know, grasping, you know, like what would be, you know, the measures of central tendency and the differences between them, you're never going to learn what a t-test does if you can't master that concept. So I think the biggest thing for students is to really just be aware that learning the concepts is more important than their grades. And it's important to really seek out help and to communicate with your instructor. Don't be afraid that your instructor is going to give you a bad grade if you raise your hand and ask questions or, you know, don't know the answer. Like, you're here because you don't know. If everyone knew statistics, you would not have to take all these courses, and you could, you know, we all wouldn't be here. So I think that, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't assume that, you know, everyone else knows it and you don't, because the truth is that nobody knows this stuff. That's why everyone's taking these courses, so they can learn it. But I think it's important to learn it, to actually learn it and understand the concepts. And if you do that, then you're going to get an A, guaranteed, because if you know what you're doing, then you're going to know what you're doing. That'll be reflected in your assessments. But just kind of, you know, pushing yourself through a course, going assignment by assignment just to kind of, you know, meet the grade criteria, then that's not the way to do it, because that's going to come back and get you. And I've seen this happen with other students where they get to the dissertation phase and they, like, in many ways don't recall what they learned in their statistics class. So they're just completely lost when it comes to statistics. And it's like, well, don't you remember? You spent 8 weeks doing this. Like, what's going on? So again, I think it's really a mindset of focusing on learning the concepts and remembering that, you know, you're going to apply these to your dissertation and you're going to apply them in life. And so it's to your benefit to really try to understand this stuff and see the value in it and not focus so much on the grade.
Well, thank you so very much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Nicole, I'm just going to just add that, you know, understanding the concepts is just, I mean, I'm not sure whether I've had any, I don't recognize the names, but I always say to my students, I don't care if you get it right or not. You're still going to get full marks if you show them that you've tried to understand it. Because you're not going to get all of this. And it is about understanding the concepts. For the students who have done Psychology 104, when I mark that work, I know there's a new version of it out now. Students can get A's on every single task except for the very last one where they have to apply what they learn.
Right.
And I have failed so many of the last pieces of work, and it's kind of, student got A's all the way through, and yet when it came to actually applying it in just an abstract sense, they just couldn't do it. And it was kind of, a bit worried here, you know, how much of this is rote learning and how much of this is real understanding.
Right.
I mean, they always pass the course because they've got all their grades from all the previous things, but it's the ones who really just get the understanding, and it's just working on that understanding of, you know, what's in between a t-test, a regression, and a correlation. You know, it's one's a prediction, one's a relationship, one's a difference test. You know, it's kind of get that idea and you'll solve your problems for your last assignment. It's just getting those key little concepts, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. And I see that as well with students when I teach the course. And I think that, you know, again, I see that too with students, like I said, you know, when I'm chairing dissertations, who are just so afraid of statistics. And one of the things I really hate to see, and I've had this happen with a few students, is, you know, they'll talk to me about their research ideas and what they want to do. And they're just, oh, I'm definitely doing a qualitative study. I have to do a qualitative study. And I'll say, but why? And, oh, I can't do statistics. They're just so afraid of statistics that it like dictates what their dissertation is going to be. And that's not how it's supposed to be. Your dissertation is supposed to be based on a research question, and then the methods that you use are supposed to speak to that research question and how best to answer it. Your dissertation is not supposed to be based off of your fear of statistics, and then that means you're, you know, going to propose something that you think is easier, which is a qualitative study in some cases for some people. But the reality is, if you do a really good qualitative study, it is not easier than a quantitative study by any means. It's a lot more time consuming. If it's done correctly, then, you know, it can be a lot more rigorous in terms of the analysis than a quantitative study. But again, I think students sometimes get sort of pushed into doing these qualitative studies because they think it's going to be easier, and they're just so afraid of statistics because, you know, they maybe didn't really understand the concepts when they were going through the course. And I think that's really a limitation and something, you know, hopefully we can start to change and get people just sort of more confident in their abilities around statistics and the ideas that underlie it.
Well, I just want to add something to that because I'm doing qualitative, and I have an entire wall of Post-it notes where I have 3 people said this, 4 people said this. One is all the way off to the side that said that. The other one's off to the side that said this. It's actually not at all easier because you have an enormous amount of data in those interview questions. And if people like to talk, and so far, the 6 people I've had couldn't shut them up.
Yeah.
You have all this stuff coming in, and
Yeah.
the themes and patterns and transcribing and throwing it into in vivo. It is not easier.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And again, though, that's something that you don't really realize until you're in it, right? Until you're actually doing it yourself and you see like, oh, wow, like look at all this data. You know, so I think, you know, people get afraid of numbers, but then, and they sometimes think, oh, qualitative will be easier because it's softer. But it's really not. I mean, there's just as much data coming at you with a qualitative study, if not more, than with a quantitative study in many cases.
I wish I now had done quantitative, seriously, but it's just that my specific study, I need to know their stories, and you
Right.
can't get that from a survey.
Right, and that's, again, that's why it's really so dictated by the research question. And that's why, you know, when a student approaches me and says, oh, I want to do a qualitative study, I shut it down and I say, why? We don't even know, I don't even know what you want to do a study on. So how could you know what type of methodology you're going to use yet? It has to be based on the research question, and then the methods will follow. And I just think you know, students shouldn't be afraid of a methodology, and that shouldn't really push you toward one type of question or another. It should really just be what you're interested in, what the literature supports, you know, as the next step in terms of a research idea. And that should be what dictates a study, not, you know, a fear of numbers or, you know, something about math.
Dr. Avena, I wanted to make another point that worked in my case, and maybe I can help students behind me.
Yeah.
But what I did is I did a literature review before I picked my method so that I could see what would best fit my research question.
That's a great thing to do. Yeah.
And when I figured out, oh, this has never been done before. They've done surveys on this. They've done quantitative, but nobody's gotten these guys' stories of what they went through being stigmatized and how they were able to manage through the theoretical framework of resilience. There's nothing. So that's what dictated my choice of qualitative over quantitative.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And again, that's something I've always kind of, it's been a little unclear to me. I mean, I think at NCU at points they kind of suggested people do chapters 1, then chapter 3, then chapter 2. It's kind of been evolving over the years, I think, in terms of what's being suggested. I've always told students, we got to do chapter 1, 2, and 3, because you got to know what's been done before you can decide what you're going to do. And the worst thing in the world would be to, you know, come up with this beautiful idea of a study that you want to do and then find out that there's already been like 50 studies that have done the exact same thing. So you really need to be informed of the literature. That's what's going to inspire you. That's what's going to lead you to then come up with your aha moment and your big idea. So it's critical to do that chapter 2, I think, before you even start to conceive, you know, the details of your study. And in many cases, I've actually had students, you know, because in chapter 1, you kind of have to give hints of what you're going to do in terms of the methodology. I've had students have to go back and change parts of their chapter 1 after it's already been approved because they realized after doing the literature review, oh no, this is the method I need to do. This is what I have to do. And this is, what makes the most sense. So it has to be an iterative process, and you do really need to know the literature and know what's been done before you can decide what you're going to do. Because if you don't, then it's like just, you're pulling stuff out of the air.
And that's why I started my literature search when I was still in Psychology 7109, because I needed to make a valid decision on
Right.
what I should do. And if I started with chapter 1 and then went to chapter 2 and then went, oh, I've done my problem statement, but my literature review is not cohesive with my problem statement, I would have to go back and do it all over again. So I actually started with chapter 2 before I started chapter 1.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think that could be beneficial for some people. I think it's really just, it's so unique. Everybody's dissertation is so different. Everyone's journey is so different. I almost feel like they're like fingerprints. Like there's no two that are ever going to be the same. And I think it really boils down to, how you work, how you think about things, how your study is going to play out, and just what's going to work best for you to get it done. That's really my advice. And, we have these sort of guidelines that we give students in terms of, okay, do this first, do this second. But I think those are flexible in terms of, for some students, it is important to kind of get a better handle on the literature before you really, come up with the plan of what you're going to do and come up with your problem statement. And so doing that extra research can be beneficial. But I have had a couple students that get overwhelmed because, you start to look at the literature and then you see that there's like 2,000 papers on your topic, and it's like hard to sort of figure out like, okay, well, what do I do? Do I read all these? How do I figure this out? So yeah, it's definitely something I think that, is really kind of unique to the individual and unique to our individual learning styles. But definitely going ahead and doing the research before you get into the dissertation component is a very good idea, because it's never too early to start. I teach 7109 too. And I mean, I got people that I'm working with now that I have them like doing research on, they're going to have their whole chapter 2 pretty much done by the time they finish the course, just because we've conversed so much about, some of the issues that have come up with the assignments in that particular course. So yeah, there's definitely a need to kind of think ahead when it comes to the dissertation.
Well, it is now 9:01. Do we have any other questions from the body in attendance? I don't see anything. Anyone, any last comments or last words from anyone?
And I'll just put it out there, if anyone has a question or didn't want to speak up or whatever, something they think of after, reach out to me. Happy to talk over email or, get on a Skype call with anyone who has questions about stats or life or whatever you want to talk about.
Well, I wanted to end this on a personal note. Next month will be my last month as president. I am going to resign after the April meeting. I need to focus on my final chapters. I need to focus on getting this published. I need to focus on getting it to be submitted for dissertation of the year and for poster of the year. So I will be your president until the end of the April meeting, and then I will be resigning at the end of that meeting, which means that DJ will then take over as president for the May meeting and for all meetings henceforth until his term is up and he has to run for re-election. I want to thank you all for everything you've done for me. It's been a wonderful year serving as your president, and I hope that I will have left you something to move forward. So I make a motion to close. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I am asking for a motion from somebody to close this meeting.
Before we make the motion, Dr. Avena, I want to say it's been a privilege meeting you. I was really scared at first when I read your bio because of your brilliant mind, your nutrition stuff. So I'm really excited. I will be reaching out to you. Maybe I can even show you what I've been working on with my dissertation, so you could probably help me fine tune it too. That would be wonderful. So
okay, sure.
with that being said, Jim, thank you so much for being our president. I hope I can do what you have done. I'm shocked that you throw this on me, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. So with that being said, I make a motion to close meeting, but April's meeting I will be hosting, and we have Dr. Robert Egbert from the school. He'll be taking on dynamics and family cultural values. So please attend, and I make a motion to close this meeting.
I second. Okay.
Eric seconded.
Everyone have a good evening. And again, it's been a privilege for the past year, and I look forward to one last time in April. Thank you all so much.
Hey, good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Dr. Avena.
Good night, Crystal.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Eric.
Good night.